Hi guys, on to chapter 25. George fell back through the door and landed on the floor with a heavy thump. This time, the journey back from outer space to Eric's library had seemed to suck all of the breath out of him, and he had to lie on the floor for a few seconds, panting, before he could get up. When he staggered to his feet, he hoped he would see Eric hurtling through the doorway, but instead all he could see was the outline of a door, which had become faint and wavy. It seemed to be fading into nothing, and he yelled out, "Eric!" but got no reply. A millisecond later, the door vanished completely. "Cosmos!" shouted George, undoing his space helmet. "Quick, Cosmos, we have to!" But as he turned around to see where the great computer would have been, where Cosmos should have been, there was just a tangled, spaghetti-like mess of colored wires and empty space. Looking wildly around the room, George saw the library door was ajar. He ran through it and into the hallway to find the front door wide open and the cold night air blowing in. With no time to take off his spacesuit, he dashed into the street where he could make out the shapes of 4 boys running along the road. One of them was carrying a bulky backpack with a few wires sticking out of the top of it. George hurried after them as fast as he could in the heavy suit. As he stumbled along, familiar voices drifted back to him on the wind. "Be careful with that," George heard Ringo shout. "Beep, beep," came the noise from the bathtub. "Unlawful action. Unauthorized command." "When is it going to shut up?" said Tank, who was carrying the backpack. "How can it even speak when it isn't even plugged in?" "Help, help," came the mechanical voice from the backpack. "I am being kidnapped. I am the world's most amazing computer. You cannot do this. Alarm, alarm." "I'll run out of battery soon," said Whippet. "Unhand me, you villains," said the backpack. "This bouncing is bad for my circuits." "I'm not carrying it any farther," said Tank, coming to a stop. George immediately stopped in his tracks. "Someone else can take over." "All right," said Ringo. "Give it to me. Listen up, little computer. You will shut up for the rest of the journey, or I will take you to pieces bit by bit until you're just a pile of microchips." "Eek," said the computer. "Do you understand?" said Ringo in fierce tones. "Of course I understand," said the computer. "I am Cosmos, the world's most amazing computer. I am programmed to understand concepts so complex that your brain would explode if you were—" "I said," said Ringo, "shut up." "Which part of these 2 words don't you get, you moron?" "I am a peaceful computer," said Cosmos. "I am not used to threats or violence." "Then be quiet," said Ringo, "and we won't have to threaten you." "Where are you taking me?" whispered Cosmos. "To your new home," said Ringo, shouldering the backpack. "Come on, gang, let's get there." The boys set off at a run at once. George stumbled after them as fast as he could, but he was unable to keep up. After a few more minutes, he lost them in the dark night. There was no point in running any farther. He didn't know which way they had gone. But even so, he felt sure he knew who had asked Ringo and his friends to break in and steal Cosmos, and knowing that was the first step to finding the supercomputer again. As Ringo and the boys ran off, George turned and walked back to Eric's house, where the front door was still open. He went in and headed straight for little Eric's library. Eric had told him to look for the book. But which book? The library was full of books, stretched out from ceiling to shelves. George picked up the large, heavy volume and looked over the cover. "Euclidean quantum gravity," he flicked through the pages and tried to read. "Because the retarded time coordinate goes to infinity on the event horizon, the surface's constant phase of the solution will pile up near the event horizon." Oh, it was hopeless. He had no idea what any of it meant. He tried to read another book, this one called The Unified String of Theories. He read a line from it. The equation for the conformal... His brain hurt as he tried to make out what it meant. In the end, he decided that he hadn't found the right book, and he carried on looking around the library. "Find the book," Eric had said. "Find my new book, George." George stood in the middle of the library and thought very hard. With no Cosmos, no Eric, no Annie, it seemed like a terribly empty in that house. The only link George had to them was a pink spacesuit and some tangled wires and these huge piles of science books. Suddenly, he missed them all so terribly that he felt a sort of pain in his heart and realized if he didn't do something, he might never see any of them again. Cosmos had been stolen, Eric was fighting a black hole, and Annie would certainly never want to speak to him again if she thought George had anything to do with her dad getting lost in outer space. He had to think of something. He concentrated very hard and thought of Eric and tried to imagine him with his new book in his hand, to picture what the front cover looked like so he could remember. The book, what if the book had been called? Where would he have put it? And suddenly George knew. He ran to the kitchen and looked in the teapot, and sure enough, there were tea stains and rings where hot mugs had been resting on top of it. It was a brand new book called Black Holes, which George now realized was written by Eric himself. There was a sticker on it that read what must have been Annie's handwriting, "Freddie the Favorite Pig's Book," with a little cartoon drawing of Freddie next to the words. "That's it, thought George. This must be the new book Eric was so happy to find. When Freddie stormed through the house, this must be the one. There was one more thing he needed from Eric's house. It was another book, a large one with lots of pages. He grabbed it from beside the telephone, stripping off Annie's pink spacesuit and shoving 2 books in his school bag, rushing back to his own house, closing Eric's front door behind him as he went. That evening, George scarfed down his supper very quickly, shot upstairs, claiming he had lots of homework. First of all, he said he had to get the big book out of his bag, and on the front it said Telephone Directory. His parents didn't have a phone, and George thought it was unlikely they would have a phone book, which is why he had borrowed Eric's. He searched through the alphabetical list under R, using his finger to go down the columns of names until he came to Reaper, Dr. Reaper, G. Reaper, 42 Forest Way. George knew Forest Way. It was the road that led him out of town to the woods where his parents took him in the autumn to gather mushrooms and blackberries. He figured he couldn't go there tonight. It was too late, and his parents would never let him go. And anyway, he still had to do work with the Black Hole book. First thing in the morning, he thought he'd go to Dr. Reaper's house on the way home. By then, he hoped he would have a plan. He put down the phone book and got Eric's Black Hole book out of his bag, desperately hoping it held the information he needed to rescue Eric. Every time he thought about Eric, which was about once every 3 minutes, he felt awful. He imagined him alone and frightened in outer space, not knowing how to get back, with black holes trying to drag him in its dark belly. George opened the book and read the first sentence of page 1. "We're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars," he read. It was a quote from the famous Irish writer Oscar Wilde. George felt it was written specifically for him because he was indeed in a gutter and knew for sure that some people were looking at the stars. So he kept on reading, but the first sentence was the only one he understood. Next he read, in 1916, Carl Schwarzschild found the first ever analytic black hole solution to Einstein's equation. "Ark," he groaned. The book was in a foreign language again. Why had Eric told him to look for this book? He didn't understand at all. And Eric had written it, yet every time Eric told him about science, he had made it sound so simple to understand. Eric felt his eyes tearing up. He had failed Cosmos, Annie, and Eric. He lay down on his bed with his book in his hand as hot tears ran down his cheeks. There was a knock at the door, and his mom came in. "George, you look very pale, honey. Are you feeling okay?" "No, I'm really just finding my homework difficult." "Well, I'm not surprised." She picked up the Black Hole book, which had fallen out in George's hand and was on the floor. "It's a very difficult textbook for professional researchers. Honestly, I'm going to write to the school and tell them this is ridiculous." As she spoke, a few pages fluttered out from the back of the book. "Oh, dear," said George. "I'm dropping your notes. They're not mine," George was about to say when he stopped himself. At the top of one of the pages, George read, "My difficult book made simple for Annie and George." "Thanks, Mom," he said quickly, grabbing the pages from her. "I think you've just found the part I needed. I'll be fine now." "Are you sure?" "Yes, Mom. George said, nodding furiously. "You're a star. Thanks." "A star," said Mom. "That's a nice thing to say." "Not really," said George. "You are. And you don't work too hard, my little star," George's mom said, kissing him on the forehead. George was smiling now, so he went off downstairs to put another batch of lentil cakes in the oven, feeling a lot happier now. As soon as Mom left the room, George jumped off the bed and gathered all the bits of paper that had fallen out of the book. They were covered in spidery handwriting and little doodles and numbered pages 1 through 7. So he started to read.